The God-saturated life is that section, and then the theme for this week is becoming more like Jesus in our public actions. In our public actions. And boy, I tell you, there's no time like now for us to wrestle a little bit with what it means for us to be more like Jesus in the way that we act publicly out there in the public stage. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of take us through some stages of how it is that we know what it is that we're to do as we're around other people, as we're taking on our vocation, our calling to be Jesus people out there. What is it that we do as we form our minds around that? And I'll touch on actually all three of the readings for today, but I think they come together and they flow well in terms of a single picture of what it means to be a Jesus walker in this world. So the first piece has to do with acting out of who we are. So for us as followers of Jesus in the contemporary world, trying to figure out how to be in relationship with others, to know that we're not just kind of making it up, but it comes from something that's deeper than our DNA that's been given to us by our parents. And that comes the gospel lesson that comes, that addresses this. Jesus addresses it directly. So these Pharisees and Herodians, they all come to Jesus. They want to trap him, and so they say, "So is it right for us to pay taxes or not?" It's a question that probably all of us ask at some point. Is it right for me to pay taxes or not? But in particular, they're interested in getting Jesus into trouble about whether or not they should pay taxes to Caesar, to the secular government. And Jesus will have none of their trap. But he says, well, so show me a coin. And they show him a coin, a denarius. And he asks the question, so whose image is it that's stamped on that coin? And so the answer is obvious. It's Caesar. And his inscription is on there. It says Caesar. And so Jesus says, okay then. So give to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar. And give to God the things that belong to God. Well, so there must have been a period of silence there, because people's heads are kind of connecting dots, making the connections. So if we know that a coin belongs to Caesar because we see his image stamped on it, then how do we know what is God's, what belongs to God, except by what his image is stamped on, right? And so what is his image stamped on? You, right? You. Each one of us, as we're God's creatures, we are made in the image of God. And so if we're made in his image, if his fingerprints are on us because he made us, he crafted us, he fashioned us mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually after his image, then we know who we are. We reflect him. We reflect his glory. We reflect his personality. We reflect his thinking. We reflect all of the things that it has to do with being God. We reflect him as human beings, being made in his image. It's like a pot that all of a sudden on the bottom you see the thumbprint of the potter that's there. It shows the ownership, the creative ownership of that pot. So we reflect his glory in this world. And so then for us who are trying to be Jesus followers, then we don't have to somehow say, how do we make this up, or where do we get this, or this is something that's imposed on us from outside of us, and somebody has to tell us that. We all of a sudden know it's deeper, as I said, than our DNA. It's part of our very nature. And so we function out of our God-likeness. So then, we might say, oh, all right, so let's just do this thing. Let's go out and be God bearers in the world. So we go out into the world and we begin to try to influence others. We try to influence people in our families. We try to influence people in the political world. We try to influence people at a school board, wherever it is. We try to influence as God bearers. And what is the thing that happens? Failure. Every time. Not 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. Every single time. There is a sense of failure as we, as God bearers, go out into the world trying to figure out how it is that we can do this on our own. And then we learn from the experience of others, hundreds and thousands of people who have written about the spiritual life and who have come to this place of recognizing that a critical part of our spiritual journey is to fail, is to fall flat on our face and to be in pain about it. And then to be able finally now to have an honest conversation with God. So God, what did you get me into? Why am I doing all of this? And so we can hear the echo in the life of Moses for the reading for today. So in the reading for today, you'll remember last week, it had to do with, so Moses is bringing all of the children of Israel out of Egypt. They're there now at the mountain. Moses has been working hard to be able to get them there. So he leaves them for a few days in order to be able to be in relationship with God and get the instruction manual from God. And then while he's gone, what do? Well, they decide, well, he's been gone for a long time, and so we need somebody who's going to be more immediately available to us. And so they pull off their gold jewelry and they make this big golden calf, and then they give into the pagan revelry that they've been used to before because they're wanting to be able to incite this gold god to be there for them and to incite him into action to do things for them. And Moses then comes down from the mountain, and what does he do with this tablet of God's plan, the 10 Commandments? He smashes it, right? And all of a sudden the judgment of God comes down. Thousands of people die because of the judgment of God. And Moses just says, I don't know what you're expecting of me. I don't know what it is, how it is that I can possibly do this. And so at the beginning of the lesson, he says, so tell me, would you, who is going to go with me? You told me to lead these people. You told me this is my job description, and I'm a failure, and they're not making it any better. They're making it worse. So tell me, who's going to go with me to lead these people? And number 2, would you teach me how to lead these people? Teach me your ways. So who's going to go with me? Because I am not enough myself. And teach me your ways, because my ways aren't working. Have you ever prayed that prayer before? It's the prayer that everyone prays as we walk down the spiritual life and realize that life is too big for us. The enemy is far too clever for us. And circumstances and people are arrayed against us, and we face failure. But then what is God's response to Moses? He says this, verse 14, he says, the Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. My presence, and the P here is a capital P. It means the presence that is the divine presence. It's his personal presence there with them. His presence will be there with him as he leads the people. And he will give him rest. not anxiety, not flipping and flopping in the middle of the night, not able to sleep, not this heavy, burdensome load. But he says, I will give you rest. And in order to give him that rest, and in order to guarantee him of what this presence is, he says, Moses, let me take you someplace. And he sticks him on a rock in a place where he'll be safe. And God allows his presence to parade before Moses. Why is it? Just because God loves showing off? Well, in some ways, I think God does love showing off. And I think God is the one being in the universe for whom showing off is a good thing. But he shows his glory to Moses in order to be able to demonstrate to Moses how great and powerful he is. So when he says that his presence is with him, there is no problem bigger. There is no difficulty too big, too challenging, too tough, too confusing. No one can stand against the presence of this awesome God. And as we see the awesomeness, as he takes our breath away, and we realize what it means for him to be present with us, all of a sudden, our blood pressure goes down. We know that we're not the ones who are responsible for making everything okay. He is, and he takes our burdens from us, and he gives us contentedness and peace, knowing that we can trust in him. And so then what do? We've got his presence. He puts us at peace. But now we still need some tools. We need some tools in order to be able to go out and to be able to see how can this work. And in the history of the spiritual life, it has always been that God has given us mentors, models, people who have lived the spiritual life like you did earlier and have experienced what it means to fail, have experienced what it means to have those honest conversations with God, know more about what it means to have a relationship with God than you or I do, and so they're able to be with us, to be able to show us, to model for us, what does a God-saturated life look like? And so we can ask ourselves, who are those models for you? In the epistle lesson for today from 1 Thessalonians, St. Paul is writing to the Thessalonians, and he says, you know, we came and we stayed with you. We were there with you, and we worked with you so that you were able to see how all of this works. He says, this is verse 6. He says, you then became imitators of us. You did what we did, and of the Lord, for you welcomed the message in the midst of the severe suffering with the joy given by the Holy Spirit. There was a difficult famine that was going through the land. There was tremendous poverty. There was persecution that was going on. They were having a hard time of it, and they were learning what it meant to live a Jesus-saturated life, a God-saturated life in the midst of those difficult circumstances with joy. And as they did that, as they imitated Paul and his followers and their mentors, as they did that, and they experienced failure, but then they also experienced success, and they also experienced the presence of God among them, then all of a sudden, a miracle happened. They, who were the most humiliated and the least powerful, it says, became models for all believers in Macedonia and Achaia, for all the surrounding area. People then began to look to them because they were experiencing in their lives things that other people had only heard about, but they'd never really seen it. But now all of a sudden, because these folks in Thessalonica got real, all of a sudden they could see God working. because they had a model. They followed the model, and then they themselves became models for others to be able to give hope. It's always the way this works. And so then it is really an important thing for us to ask, so who are your models? Who are the people for you that are ahead of you, that are working every day? They don't sugarcoat anything. They're just honest about their own Christian walk, and they don't have any magic answers, but they do have ways of going about demonstrating the presence of God in their life. And maybe they wouldn't admit the places where it's powerful for them or successful for them, but you, in looking at their life, you can see the fruit of it, and you want to be able to go there. So it's so important for us to be able to identify those folks in the Christian journey who are ahead of us and who allow us to continue to grow towards them, because they give us tools that we can use. I've mentioned this guy's name here before because he is a role model for me. I've never met him, but his name is Francis Collins. And I mention him now because he was just awarded the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion just this last month. Francis Collins, if you don't know him, was up until about 15 years ago, I think, was the head of the Human Genome Project. And the responsibility for them was to map out the human gene. It was one of the goals that our country had, just like, sending somebody to the moon. We're going to work together and we're going to send somebody to the moon, and somebody's going to walk on the moon, and people laughed at it because it seemed so impossible. And yet there were people who worked, teams of people who worked, and finally they sent a rocket to the moon, and somebody actually walked on the moon. And so like that, the Human Genome Project was to landscape the human gene, to be able to open doors for medical research. And so because of the work of Francis Collins and others, sickle cell anemia, which was a blight among minority communities in this country, has been cured, eradicated, because of their being able to understand the layout of the human gene. They're making tremendous strides in research on cancer and working literally 24/7 around the clock on opportunities for combating this current virus. So we have to just hang in there because the solution will be coming. But not only, he's not just somebody who's impressive because of his academic and professional career, as he went on from the Human Genome Project to now become the director of the National Institutes of Health. But for me, it's because of his Christian faith. He was converted as an adult, as he, as a doctor, went to call on one of his patients, and one of his patients was terminally ill, and she said, "By the way, doctor, I believe in, that I'm doing fine. Jesus has my heart and soul, and when I die, I know I'm going to be with him. So what about you? What do you think?" Well, that kind of put him on the spot. And he tells the story. And so he went on to really investigate that, and he had his own Christian conversion, but he didn't leave his mind behind. He was a scientist, and so he had to answer questions as a mature scientist, and so he did. But he always carried with him this sense of compassion for people and knowing that the truth speaks for itself. So you don't have to raise your voice when truth speaks. You can speak gently and quietly, because it's the truth that brings the power, not somehow my necessity to coerce or to make you believe like I do. And so one of the famous relationships with him was his relationship with Christopher Hitchens, who was the famous American atheist. He wrote books that were disparaging of the Christian faith. He wrote very disparaging articles and books about Mother Teresa. He wrote a New York Times bestseller called "God Is Not Good," and he himself, in his speech, was very kind of demeaning and attacking about the Christian faith. And so he and Francis Collins were invited to debate each other, not just once but numerous times. But as they did that, they began to form a relationship. And then he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. And Francis began to meet with him regularly and to talk about his treatment regime, and actually made tweaks that they feel like have actually gave him additional months to live. And they talked about God and whether it was possible to be a rational human being and believe in God. Francis Collins, in spite of the abuse that he received, Francis Collins never raised his voice, and he didn't become disparaging for Christopher Hitchens. In fact, after Christopher had died, Francis wrote this about him. He said, I think it was the opportunity to see what lies underneath a very hard-edged perspective that you would normally be really put off by. It's a reminder of the fact that if we really want to understand each other, we can't be put off by those kinds of superficial, admittedly sometimes difficult to listen to perspectives. There is real humanity in everyone, even people who are obnoxious or aggressive or say mean things. That doesn't mean that we have to reciprocate. It means that we can look for the person behind the voice in order to be able to appeal to the fact that they too are made in the image of God. When Christopher Hitchens died, Francis Collins was asked to speak at his memorial service, and he also played for him what he called the Hitchens Sonata. He had composed a sonata, and he played it there for Christopher Hitchens in his room before he died. And they became really the best of friends. And Christopher Hitchens said about Francis Collins, he was the greatest living American. The greatest living American. So that's why he's one of my role models. Someone who is able to see the person behind the voice and able to build relationships in the midst of adversity, and knowing that you don't have to coerce with truth. Truth speaks on its own. So, who are your role models? Who are the people who teach you how to live your faith more deeply? Who challenge you to slough off, to leave behind some of the old habits and the things that keep you back? We're made in the image of God. We're given the guarantee of His awesome presence with us. And we're given role models from whom we can learn. And the awesome opportunity of being role models for others as we deepen in our own spiritual journey. The God-saturated life. It's an adventure for us all. Amen.